Welcome to my Claim Your Worthiness podcast, intimate conversations with Gail Jones. We all have a safe place within to create anew. In each episode, I hope to add to your inner sanctuary to strengthen the belief in yourself and your dreams. Claiming our worthiness sets the foundation for centering us back into our greatness. From this foundation, we create our most amazing lives. I'll be sharing insights and resources from my own journey and from others who are transforming their lives. Lean in and receive the wisdom shared. You are worthy of having this special time with yourself. Hello, I'm Gail Jones here today with my guest, Traci Philips, who's author of the newly released book, Looking In, Discover, Define, and Align the True Value of Your Life, Leadership, and Legacy. Traci will be discussing wading into leadership, yes, as in the metaphor of wading in water, along with some other innovative ways to look at creating better skills for leading this new emerging world. As we're all beginning to realize, we're not going back to the ways things were before the pandemic, so new skills are needed now to move forward. Traci's going to share some of those today. But first, let me give you a little bit of her background. Traci, as an executive leadership and performance strategist, supports visionary business owners and corporate executives to learn and practice better communication, resolution strategies, decision-making, and leading during times of change and when the stakes are high. She teaches her clients how to create a more cohesive, cooperative experience and environment within their workplace culture. Her ultimate goal is to support her clients to live authentically and lead powerfully by creating more awareness about who they are, how they want to be seen, and what legacy they want to leave behind. You can learn more about Traci at theinnatecoach.com. So Traci, before we dive in deep into all your leadership expertise and passion for coaching in this changing world, can you tell us a little bit about your own worthiness journey or a time in life when you might not have felt worthy and had to reclaim it?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, thank you for having me here today, Gail. It's such a pleasure to finally see you too, because we've spoken before. As far as my worthiness journey, so it's interesting when you and I were talking about this before in preparation for today's conversation, it struck me as interesting because when you asked me that question about thinking about a time of worthiness, right, where I grappled with it, I was at a bit of a loss. I think partially being a coach, we think in terms of empowerment and feeling our worth and knowing our worth. And so sometimes we might forget. But I was really hard pressed. And when we got off the phone, that hard pressed question stayed in my mind. I was like, why am I having such a hard time thinking about a story? We all have them. So why? And that really stood out as being very significant to me. And I actually took that question into a meditation. And what I came out with was pretty outstanding. And so I have to thank you for being part of the impetus for me to dig in deeply to this. Many things can happen when we go through certain things in life that challenge our worthiness. And what we're oftentimes accustomed to is that questioning of worthiness. So we start to see characteristic traits of not feeling confident, giving away our value, not standing up for ourselves, not advocating for our needs, those kinds of things. But it also can go the other way. Okay. And what I realized with me is that I became super, super sensitive to where I was being devalued, right? I almost had this knee-jerk trigger early in life to anything that even smelled like somebody was undervaluing me. And I became almost this warrior for my own value. Okay. That also is a trigger of unworthiness. As much as it may look like the opposite, like I know my worth and I'm not going to stand for how I'm being treated, it's actually coming from the same place as those people who act in ways that we characteristically think of as feeling unworthy.
So do you feel you overcompensated?
I overcompensate. That was the word I was just going to use, is that the reason I wasn't accessing it the same way is because when I really looked back in my storyline, it was overcompensation for that concern that I was not good enough in the eyes of the people around me. And a lot of that did come from middle school, to be frank. I had a pretty successful earlier childhood. I was a premier athlete and I was very revered for what I could do as a swimmer and all of that. Really up to the age of 7, it wasn't an issue. But once I started middle school, I was moved to a school where I didn't know anybody. It was a private school. Everybody had more than I did, more intelligence, more money, more more social ability, all of it.
So that belief about not being enough starts forming.
Very heavily. And on top of that, I was going through a very awkward, I was one of those ugly duckling middle schoolers. Like it was really a physically awkward time. And I was bullied. I was bullied. I didn't look like the other kids. I didn't dress like the other kids. I didn't act like the other kids. And I remember sitting in morning meeting every morning because that's how we would start the day. We would go to morning meeting and we were alphabetically lined up. And I was between the two most popular boys and they were awful. They were just often, we won't mention names, but they were not nice boys. And they would sit in the entire morning meeting, which seemed like it probably lasted for 4 hours. I think it was maybe 30 minutes. And they would just, because we were all sitting Indian style close, and they would just look at me and get up to me and go, "You are so ugly.
Oh my gosh.
Why are you so ugly? You are so stupid." The whole morning meeting, every day, Monday through Friday.
How hurtful.
In each ear, having the popular boys just telling me how terrible I was. I had no purpose in being. And so when I really started to think back on this, I'm like, that definitely affected me. And although I've done a lot to overcome those things, and I can look at it now as a great challenge in my life to really step up and give myself what I wasn't getting from those around me.
Right.
It still was a struggle. And I think to call it what it was, which was a challenge of unworthiness, is really something that's deeply healing. So again, I thank you for that opportunity to do that, because as much as I definitely have not skipped over those years, it's not sticking my head in the sand. I think by not acknowledging what was really going on, that I was keeping myself from fully being able to heal in the way that I probably needed to. So that's my journey.
There's so many people that have been bullied that this is exactly where some of the unworthiness starts forming in them. And I think when we see how accomplished you are in the world and other people, we look at their external accomplishments and don't realize that they could be carrying an inner wound. And you've done a lot to be healing that. I'm curious, and before we dive into talking a little bit about your book and other things, what have you learned from your own worthiness journey that you now bring to leaders?
A lot of it is struggle. It's one of the things that Adam Grant says about innovation, right? Is that the greatest innovators are the ones that aren't afraid to make the biggest failures. You can tell what a person's really made of when they're being challenged. It's like we all can come across as the best sides of ourselves, when everything's comfortable and perfect. But when we're challenged, which we've been as a collective for the last 2 years, things start to come into transparency. We really get to see what we're made out of, or what we're made of. And so that's really what I help leaders with. For me, there were multiple challenges in my life, but I think all of that really allowed me, and especially now in retrospect, to look back and say, because I do believe we're most challenged in our greatest gifts. One, so that we learn to hone those skills, but two, so that we recognize them. Because many times we're walking around with these incredible values that we don't know we have because we've never been challenged to utilize them. And so for me, that's one of the things I always dive into. And much like you, will start by asking the leaders I work with, where are your biggest wounded places? Because those places that you have given the story of wound to are your transformational points. Excellent. Right? These are some of the greatest values, not in just the overcoming of, but of the reclaiming of the value that lies beneath them. Yeah,
transforming pain into purpose for a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Can you just talk a little bit about, I know it comes at the end of your book, but it was such a profound thought and it really sunk into you as well, wading into leadership. Can you talk a little bit more now with the pandemic and everything that's going on in the world? What does that mean to leaders to be wading right now?
Yeah, one of the things that we're taught as soon as we come out of the womb is that your value isn't what you do. So we become human doings, right? What can I do to be valuable? What can I do to be relevant? What can I do? And especially as leaders, when so many people are looking to us for that leadership, is that we're always looking at what we need to do. And we miss out on the presence, being present. And we all understand that level of being conscious and present. We get it conceptually, but many people struggle with how to do it actually. And the waiting piece, it as it came up, and as the end of my book, it came up as a conversation with a longtime friend a number of years ago, because he had just gone through some transformational coaching. And I was talking to him about his experiences. And he said, probably one of the biggest takeaways for me was, and he says, and it's so funny how the word waiting sounds like waiting. Depending on, in Colorado, we don't make distinctions between our double T's and our D's. So former and ladder, it sounds exactly the ladder that we climb and the former and the ladder. Sounds exactly the same. So it can sound like that depending on your accent, but you wait. Being present with your environments and your engagements is also about making room for them to come in and play a role. It's not just for us to do everything. It's like, where can we co-create not only with the other humans in our presence, but the other energies in our presence? No matter what you believe, if you're spiritual or religious, or I think many of us realize that even the environment itself, Mother Nature, plays a role in what we're experiencing.
Right.
And if we're not waiting around in our environment and letting kind of that wash over us and influence us, at least to the point where we take it in and filter it through our own inner filter, and we're just so focused on what we need to do, we really are closing ourselves off in many ways when we talk about decision making. Decision making doesn't just come from the head. That's where the doing decisions come from. It comes from how we feel and what we sense. And if we're cutting those intelligent information gatherers out of our equation, just with decision making alone, we're usually making decisions on only, a fraction of the information available to us.
So would you say waiting is really a slowing down and a pause?
It is a pause for sure. And we can even be an active pause. I tell people pause isn't always the quiet, I'm not saying or doing anything pause. Although that is a big part of it. It can be just an opening up, a deciding to be open in our action, right? To like the quick pivot, which a lot of people had to do in the last 2 years with their businesses or just their lives in general, is that as we're moving forward, we might be asked to take a quick left or a quick, and we haven't come to a full stop or pause, but we are working with the information within our environment that dictates that we need to make a quick change of some sort. So
you talk a little bit about this as there's a waking up going on as well. Some of us have been in longer than others, but I would say most of the world is waking up in some form right now. You said the conditioning going from unconditional love and self-acceptance to conditional love and self-support. Can you elaborate a little bit on that? Becoming more intentional and courageous, and intentional is such a big part of your book, which we'll talk about later, but coming out of this deep sleep.
For sure. And again, comfort zone is sleep. When we look at history, there's always cycles we go through. We're in the struggle and then we overcome the struggle. And then there's a period of time of getting comfortable with what we've created from our struggle. Right. Well, we get to a certain level of comfort and we need struggle again for growth. And so you see it in every cycle, right, of development in the world. We really are at a point in history where my generation, in some cases, those who even came just before me, we haven't been in war. We haven't here in the United States. I have to clarify that because there's many countries that have been at war for quite some time currently. But in the United States, we haven't really had any big struggles like our past ancestors have been through. And so there has been this large period of comfort. And comfort can bring on, they talk about the stages of comfort, and we finally get to apathy, and then we need to be awakened. And so what awakens us? Well, usually a jostling of some sort. My alarm in the morning always feels very jostling to me. And as we awaken again with that jostling, it's a challenge that some people, depending on our personalities, we take well or we take poorly, right? We awaken in various ways. And as we are collectively waking up, you mentioned some of us have been in this for a while, but one at a time, right? Smaller amounts of people. Sure. Now we're dealing with a very large population all waking up at the same time, which within itself, because what do we recognize when we awaken? When we're asleep, we don't know what we don't know, that blissful ignorance stage. As soon as we start to come into knowing and awareness of what we don't know is the first stage. And that is where we are in that instability, not knowing what to expect next. We're aware that there are lots of changes going on, but we don't know what's going to happen.
Can you talk a little bit more about sitting in that discomfort of the unknown? Because that's where a lot of the world is right now.
Yes. And if we think about it, if one of our major concerns in our 6 human needs is safety and security, that unknown is always going to challenge our safety and security. And if we don't feel personally safe and secure, then we're going to act a certain way based on that lack of safety and security. We're going to be in the back part of our brain, in our fight or flight, flee or freeze, the reptilian brain. And when we're back here, the cortisol that's pumping through our body shuts down our thinking brain, right? The frontal lobe of our brain that allows us to be innovative and come up with solutions to our issues. And so many people with all the fear, right? It's the fear constantly being not even dripped. It's just being like a fire hose these days
Right.
over us. It's shutting down our ability to actually think. So we're just reacting. And so when we're reacting, we also can't bring a true awareness. So then we just stay in this cycle of unknown, which feeds into the insecurity, which feeds into the fear, which continues that propagation.
Does this tie in at all to the three brains you reference in the book, the head, the heart, and the...
It does. And I think when it comes to creating that, one of the things I do want to say about, and which is the book is all about, is that the safety and security piece has been conditioned in us to reach in the outside world. So we've been taught that we need to create safety and security external to ourselves,
Sure.
Which means if I have a certain amount of money in my bank account, then I feel safe and secure. Right. If I have a particular job, then I feel safe and secure. If I have a particular relationship, then I feel right. So when all those things are taken away, we recognize that we have built this contingency model, this codependency model on the very safety and security we crave. And we've built it on external things. Right. And so what I'm trying to get people to understand is we need to build that safety and security within ourselves so that no matter what happens external to us, we still have a measure or at least a place to go where we can find that haven of feeling grounded.
Inner security, right.
Inner security. That's exactly it. If we keep looking for outer security, we're going to keep getting in that cycle of fear, especially in a time where there is nothing promised to us, which pretty much has always been an illusion. When we were born, nobody ever promised we would be safe and secure.
That is the gift of the pandemic, I think, bringing people inward and finding their soul again for a lot of people. And a lot of them will be redirected in new ways through this inner journey.
For sure.
But can you just, I know you understand it really well, but I don't know that all the listeners are aware of the head, heart, and gut brains. Could you just briefly explain what they are, and are we using different ones in these transitory times?
We are definitely being called to develop a lot of the brain capacity, as you put it, in other sections because of the time we're in. So for so long, all of the focus has been on our cerebral knowledge, our IQ, right? So the brain that we've come to know, which is in our head region. But some really interesting neuroscience studies have found that we have the same cellular structure of information, not only gathering, but information sharing in our brain, our head brain, in our hearts, and in our gut region. So the same cellular kind of components. Mm-hmm. And they knew that they were in the head brain, but when they saw this same collection of cellular structure in the heart and the gut, they're like, what is this? Mm-hmm. And then they were able to see that they're communicating with one another. These cells are communicating. And so they've come to call it the three brain, right? The research is known as the three brain research. So we have a head brain, a heart brain, and a gut brain. Mm-hmm. And each one of these brains, and just to simplify it, is the head brain can gather what's past, right? Stories we've heard from other people, experiences we've had, anything from our past. The heart brain is more how we feel about things. Obviously, the stories we give things will then cause feelings within us, right? We start to feel a certain way about those stories, that the meaning we give things. So it's where we hold the kind of the feeling memories and also the current feelings that we're having now. Mm-hmm. The gut is only in the moment. The gut is, you can only access the gut so it's not a futuristic brain, and it's a presence brain, right? It will tell you, and it also only answers yes or no questions. Right.
There are many that believe that the heart brain leads the brain. The heart leads
many people. And what they say is that each one is its own identity. Nobody leads anybody. Really, ideally, they're meant to all work in unification. Right. Because each one, it's if we had 3 departments of a company and 3 managers. Okay, we can't say that any one of those managers is leading the other one. They're all equal to one another, but they are the heads of their departments. And it is important that they rule and lead those departments effectively. And when we don't allow them to, we see problems. And so really to answer your question about where are we being asked to pull information from the different hearts today, is that we're in a time that's been never before that we've experienced, right, in this lifetime. So we can't really pull very much from our past. And when we're dealing with innovation and future things that we've maybe never known or never experienced, I mean, that the head brain is really not much use. And so what we're really trying to get people to understand with this body of information is that how we feel and what we sense are equally important to what we think, especially in times of high change and uncertainty, because we will always know how we feel about something. At any one time, if I said, Gail, how do you feel about this? You could take some time and you could tell me how you felt, right? Same thing with what do you sense? Although that's not a question that most people are used to being asked. So it may take a little while. We may have to sit and take pause, right? Wade around in that space. What am I sensing? I don't know. What am I sensing?
Do you believe there's a shift when we get more into that heart and the gut? Do you think there's a shift going on as intuition is the new power?
I do.
The more time you're spending inward, right, the more you get fine-tuned to your intuition. And like we all know, there's no PhD or MD telling us how to get through the pandemic. So for all of us, it's learning to wing our way through. But the more we're tapped into our intuition, the more powerful we are.
And we say, I trusted my gut on this. We're in a new period that they're calling the Great Resignation, right? More people than ever at all levels are leaving their job. And when a lot of people are asked why, and they're just like, it just doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel right. Or I sense that this is the right time to start my own business or do something.
So it's more gut oriented.
It is. Yeah. It's more heart and gut oriented. Right. And so I think where we've shut down those two brains and not accessed the information that's available through them, we are now being asked to develop them, because we've always had them, but it's like a muscle. If we shut it down for a while, it atrophies.
Sure.
And so we learn to work with it. And that's one of the things that I teach my clients how to do that. How do we access the different information? Because from a simplistic explanation, if we said that all the available information in the universe was broken into thirds, if our head can access a third of it and our heart can access a third of it and our gut can access a third of it, if we're only operating from our head, at best, we're operating from a third of the available information. So the more we're able to develop each of these brains, the more we're able to really collect the information that those brains can access and then have more information in general in which to go by, to make our decisions, to give meaning, to the reality that we're experiencing.
So I'd like to jump in, starting to discover more about your book for our listeners. There was an amazing question there that I really loved, and I think you pose it to your leader clients, but it applies to all of us in these transition times. Are you living a borrowed or leased life, or do you claim your own choices?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love the quote by George S. Patton, if everybody's thinking the same, someone's not thinking. And really, you hear a lot of people talk about groupthink, and are we all just automatons just absorbing and regurgitating what we're being told? Back to what I said about fear, is when we're in fear, we can only react, which means we can't think. And when we're not thinking, we're simply reacting to what we're being told, we're experiencing. It's the meaning we're being told we're supposed to give to something.
So it's like a conditioned response.
Conditioned responses, and that applies to our identity. And so are we identifying ourselves, this whole imposter syndrome thing, which we say is a syndrome? I think it's a red flag. I don't think it's a disease at all. I think it's something, and I talk about this in the book, is that it is an awakening to not being identified by what we do, but instead by wanting to be seen, heard, understood, and loved for who we are.
Right. And so which is worthiness.
It's worthiness.
Being for who we are, not what we do. So that's
correct.
Right.
Correct. And there's so many different ways we can to do this. But again, are we living a borrowed or leased life? If we're not being who we came to be authentically, then we're being something other than that. And it's probably an identity we've been handed. We've chosen to adopt, but is not our true authentic self.
So what is the one thing you would guide a leader to claiming their authentic?
First of all, it's about, many times my leader clients say this to me. They said, it's really interesting. I feel like the base of the work that you do for me is give me permission to be who I am. And it's funny that I need permission to be who I am. But in the world we live in, we really do feel like if somebody says, that makes sense. One of the things I always say to my clients is they're like, I don't know if this is relevant. I'm like, everything's relevant. We just need to figure out there's nothing about you that's wrong or broken or needs fixing. It's all relevant. You are exactly the way you are for a reason. Let's figure out what's working, what isn't working, and what we can.
What happens when they claim the authenticity? How does that change their role in a company or their company or a company they work for when they're more authentic?
It changes everything. Now they're activating from a place of true value, for one. I do make a distinction of the three zones in my book, and two of those three zones is the zone of of what I call brilliance, which is
let's take a pause here for a second, Traci, and just
Am I
go
getting ahead of you? I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I want to have you explain those 3 zones because that's the core of your book, and it's your zone model. So I think we'll be able to follow what you're saying better if we go through each zone. So can you just explain each of the 3 zones?
Yes. So zone 1 is zone of brilliance, right? So these are your innate values, right? These are your innate traits, the skills and talents and things you were born with, right? You couldn't go to school to learn them. You've always had them within you. Zone 2 is zone of achievement. All right. This is what I call your learned and earned. These are the skill sets that once you came out of the womb, you had experiences and you learned. And then zone 3 is zone of impact. So this is zone 1 plus zone 2 equals zone 3. This is where you bring your zone of brilliance together with your zone of achievement to make the impact that you're really here to make. Right. And so where I see oftentimes we have been led to believe our zone of achievement is our main value. Right. So again, what we've done, what the skill sets and things, what's on our resume, right? That's our value in the world. And, or what we've done in parenting. So if it's not for work purposes, if you're a stay-at-home mom, it's like what I've done as a mother, what I've done in my life, that's my value. When in reality, our greatest value is just in is in these innate values. And so really the acquired values are here to support the innate values, not vice versa. But the other thing about innate value is it's oftentimes our biggest blind spot. So it's those things that people go, Gail, I just don't know how you do that. And you think, well, it's not that big a deal. It's just this thing I do. It's just this way I approach things. And to other people, it's brilliant. But to you, it's just how you, that's what we're talking about. Most people will downgrade that value. Oh, it's no big deal. You know why? Because it's easy. And we've been taught and conditioned and enculturated to think that if you don't have to work hard for it, it's not worthy. It's not valuable. It's not really something that you should claim.
So is the easiest parts of ourselves, our easiest gifts, the most powerful?
Yes. Those are our superpowers. And so one of the things
Could you just list a couple of those? Could you just give a couple examples, like of a couple leaders and what you've identified as their superpower that they didn't aware of because it was so easy for them?
Yeah, I could give my own, right?
Okay.
So I oftentimes give this example. So when I was a kid, I was always told I was a troublemaker. And I remember from a very young age being told this. And I also remember being completely baffled by that statement. Because in the moment I was being told I was a troublemaker, I wasn't trying to cause trouble. I was speaking up and out. Usually when I was being called a troublemaker, it's because I was speaking up. Guess what I was doing? I have this innate talent. It's this ability to read language and decode whether somebody is telling the truth or not. So I'm like a human detector of congruency, what's aligned, and incongruency, what is not aligned. And so I can pick up in people.
So it's highly intuitive.
But it's also a linguistic thing. And it's no surprise that my first career was in language. And so I would hear inconsistencies and I would speak up, wait a minute, that doesn't add up, or that's not the truth, or because kids don't have filters. And it would get me in trouble. So I always thought of whenever I do that, I'd get in trouble. So I thought it was bad. I thought that skill, I didn't even know what I was doing, but I learned that it was bad. People didn't like it. It made them uncomfortable. It got me in trouble. And so over time, I learned to squash it and put it in the corner or deal with it in secrecy, where I would know things but not say anything. And it wasn't until I really got into coaching that I started to, and it was very funny because it was a woman who was a client of mine. She was a clinical psychologist. And she was running a transformational men's program at the federal prison. And she invited me to come along and help her with that. And she told me the reason she asked me because I had this incredible skill at what she called linguistic profiling. And I had no idea what she was talking about. I didn't even know what it was. And she explained to me, she says, you pick up patterns in language. I've heard you do it. I've seen how you do it. And I wasn't even aware I was doing it. And it was at that point I realized that thing I always thought was bad about me that I had done ever since I could remember was a superpower. Excellent. I could read into people's language in ways that they didn't even know they were communicating. Right. And as I started to turn that skill into something that I offer to my clients, where I can help people determine their core brilliance, as well as what's holding them back from their brilliance, these now became skills that were incredibly useful. And so that's one, but we can also be told things about ourselves that are positive that are also completely blind spots for us. And I was told at a very young age I was wise, and I didn't really understand what that meant at a young age. I thought it was because I was smart. Oh, you're wise, you're smart. I could figure things out. But really, we know that intelligence and wisdom are two separate things. And so as I've determined wisdom to be, or what was being called out when I was young and throughout my life, is that you said it, I'm deeply intuitive.
Mm-hmm.
And I can pull information in ways I'm not even aware where I'm pulling it.
You can't go study it.
I can't.
Comes from within.
I can't. And so people say, how did you develop this? I said, it's not about you building the same skills I was given. It's about you discovering the ones you were given, because you also have a zone of brilliance. So let's discover and define it.
No matter what is happening in our world now, know this: you are not your circumstances. Learn how to claim your internal power to thrive in Gail's 6-session coaching package, Creating a New Mindset for Thriving. Discover your hidden beliefs that hold you back. Learn empowering words and feelings that shift your mindset to create anew. Release financial setbacks and other blocks to abundance. Step into a new vision for your life with clearly defined action steps to support it. Be championed and mentored, which is a key to success. Email her at gailjones@claimyourworthiness.com to set up a complimentary 30-minute session to learn more. Gail trained with world-renowned neuroscientists to help you learn to train your brain for optimal outcomes. Check out her website, claimyourworthiness.com, especially her video on the homepage, to catch a glimpse of her expertise.
So in addition to your 3 models, that model is your model. The zone model is your model that you created, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. I like to, some other things that really stood out in your book. Talk about staying in your own lane.
The lane concept is, if we take those zones and we establish a parameter, like a lane on a highway, right? That's our parameter. We need to stay in that lane, because what happens when we veer out of our lane, bad things can happen, especially on a highway. So this idea of, once we've established our zone of brilliance and our zone of achievement and where those work together to make an impact, we need to stay in that. So when we're making decisions about where we engage, with whom we engage, if we think about it from a business owner standpoint, what are my clients? Who am I serving? But more importantly, what do I have to offer? Mm-hmm. And how am I offering that? That all needs to be congruent with who I am. Because one of the things I learned working at Butner was a lot of these men who had become incarcerated in high levels of leadership, what had gotten them to step out of their integrity time and time again.
Butner is the federal prison. I'm sorry, Butner is the federal prison.
Yeah, Butner is a federal prison here in North Carolina. What I learned that had gotten them to step out of their integrity was that they were never in their authentic self to begin with. So they weren't in their lane.
Can you just share that story a little bit, Traci? Because I don't think people are aware that you worked in that prison and you worked with CEOs.
For a 3-year period of time, I volunteered with the woman I told you before, the clinical psychologist who developed this amazing transformational program for men at the minimum security camp. So these were the white collar crimes. So the Bernie Madoff types. They had been high level in various fields, right? Some of them education, some of them finance, some of them corporate. It ran the gamut. But very intelligent men who had been in very high levels of success and were incarcerated because of the mistakes they made. And so that my job, as it were, or what I was asked to come in and help facilitate, was to teach them how their inner communications were affecting their external communications, which was leading to their decision making, the actions they took, and then the outcomes they would get. And a lot of this idea of integrity. What is integrity for you? And many of them couldn't answer that because they were so accustomed to stepping out of it that they didn't, it was this gray zone of, I don't know, it's what everybody else does. Is it integrous? It's hard to know. If everybody's doing it, is it really bad? So we had to start to get them to understand for themselves what constituted integrity, right? What was it to be integrous within yourself, your personal self? And in order to do that, we had to establish what the value that these men had, their values that they held, and were they acting in accordance to those values or were they not?
Was there a common theme among these men?
One of the questions I asked early on was, so what you were doing for your career, was that what you used to dream about doing as a kid? And there wasn't a single person that answered yes to that question. In the 3 years and the probably 7 or 8 groups of approximately 15 men that I worked with, that none of them visualized themselves as doing what they were doing. Most of them, this was the interesting piece, is most of them, if let's say they were a corporate leader, they would say, oh, I dreamed of being a rock star or an artist, or you see those a lot of the traits that would constitute either of those career types are very different.
So they were out of alignment with who they really wanted to be.
Yeah.
That was a common theme.
And when I asked them how they got into it, many of the stories were similar to my parents were both entrepreneurs. I had to go to a serious school and get a serious job and make serious money kind of thing. Or it was a reaction to what they did. We struggled as a kid and I swore I would never struggle again. And so I wanted to be powerful and have lots of money. And it was a reaction, but it wasn't in alignment with their truth.
So let's jump into leadership today again and talk a little bit more about what empowered leadership looks like these days.
One of the greatest models I think I've ever found when it comes to empowerment or helping people understand the dynamics of empowerment, it started actually in the late 1960s with the dreaded drama triangle that was created by a psychologist by the name of Dr. Stephen Karpman. And what Karpman was trying to do was show the roles that we play when we're in disempowerment, and how those roles continue to feed into more disempowerment. And he created the roles of victim, persecutor, and rescuer. And he showed how when we bounce around between those roles, we continue to create spaces and situations that created more disempowerment. About 20 years later, a man by the name of David Emerald came along and created the antithesis triangle to that. So he called it the empowerment dynamic triangle. And what he explained was, okay, so we don't want to be these roles. What do we want to do instead? How do we flip that upside down triangle right side up? And he created the roles of creator, coach, and challenger. I like to look at the coach piece as supporter, right? So if we just talk about those three roles of creator, supporter, and challenger, in order to be in full alignment and responsibility and realize you're the creator of everything you experience in life, right? The decisions you make about how to give meaning to a situation lead to the feelings you have, which leads to the actions you take, which leads to the outcomes you get. You created all of that through your choices.
Right.
Then we need two things to grow. We need challenge and support. So whereas the victim looks out into the world and says, who or what is perpetrating me and who or what needs to fix it, because I'm a victim and I can't do anything for myself, so I have to blame here and expect saviorhood here. The creator says, I need two things to grow, and I'm a growth person. I need challenge and support. So where can I use the challenges and supports in my life to grow? So they use the same things. The victim would look at a situation and say, oh, that's perpetrating me. The creator looks at it and goes, that's challenging me to grow.
And taking responsibility.
Giving it a responsible storyline. Right. And so that empowerment is the first thing I teach my clients, is that model. And I teach them what it means to be in those roles, what it means to be in the disempowered roles. What are some examples of what that looks and feels like and where that plays out and how that perpetuates more disempowerment. And it's usually very easy because they'll come to me with stories about problems with employees or problems with other leadership individuals. And I will put any problem is in a disempowered dynamic, right? So we'll say, okay, where are the roles and where do they play? And then it's almost like a game of chess. We look at where these things are creating it. And once they can see it in the model, and then we say, well, what needs to happen differently for this model to flip right side up? Once they can establish an understanding of saying, oh, instead of approaching it that way, or instead of holding space that way, or instead of coming at it that way, I need to do this instead, then it helps them internally transform some of the knee-jerk ways or the habitual ways in which they have been perpetuating. Because again, we can perpetuate by allowing ourselves to be pulled into disempowerment. We could be in empowerment and someone comes along and tries to, I have a great story of that happened to me a number of years ago, where I posted something on Facebook just to share. And it triggered someone. And this person's like, I don't like that. And I said, thank you for letting me know. And what is it you don't like? And another person comes and goes, why do you need to ask? Just take it down. You're making this person upset. So if we look at it from the disempowerment dynamic, I'm over here minding my own business, posting things to help, right? So I'm being creator. This person comes in, you victimized me. You put something up there that made me uncomfortable. And you need to, they made me both perpetrator. They're trying to make me perpetrator and rescuer. You perpetrated me and you need to fix it. You need to save me. And when I didn't do that, somebody else swooped in to play rescuer to the victim to say, you're the perpetrator. You need to take this down. You're making this person uncomfortable. So I, knowing this whole dynamic thing, didn't allow myself to get pulled into that role that they all wanted me to play, which was perpetrator. And I simply asked questions. I became the coach, the supporter, but also challenging and the saying. So I'm curious as to why it's so important that I take this down. I appreciate what you're saying, but this is why I posted it. If it's something you don't want to read, then just don't read it. This is an open forum. Trying to ask them to take responsibility as opposed to expecting me to do it.
Right. What triggered them?
And so the more I did that, engage with, but from a neutral position, not accepting that I didn't get defensive. That would have made me the perpetrator. Eventually, offline, both of them got in touch with me separately and was like, I totally see where you're coming from. They wouldn't admit it in the forum, but in the end, by just staying in my truth and not being pulled into this disempowered dynamic, I was able to invite them into a different space of taking responsibility. Sure. So then instead of being in disempowerment, we were all in an empowerment dynamic.
Right. Yeah, that's a great example. Thank you.
Sure, absolutely.
Other things that really stood out in your book was a lot about the power of intention. And I love this quote that you say in your book and then the examples that you use. But without intention, we are all walking around potentially ready to react to whatever comes our way. When we go through life on autopilot, we create accidental lives. When we are intentional about our what's, how's, where's, and why's, we can finally experience a more conscious and deliberate existence. It's a beautiful quote.
Thank you.
Can you share with us some of your intentions, what you ask? I know in the models you have intentions, but what kinds of questions you ask yourself and how you start your day?
Oh, that's such a good question, Gail. So the power of intention, I always say we have two ways to live, right? We can live accidentally, where hindsight is 20/20, we can learn from our mistakes, or we can live intentionally. And it doesn't mean we don't make mistakes living intentionally, but it means we're more quick to adopt and adapt to those and learn and see the value and not have to drag out these habitual disempowered dynamics of things. So one of the things that, and I talk about this in the book, so I won't get into it in detail, but I developed and it came before the 3 zones. So it was the kind of precursor to the 3 zones. As I created this model of what I called the what, how, where model. And I would start by asking clients, again, what is your value? And we can apply this what, how, where to anything. If you wanted to have a challenging communication, so people are afraid of confrontation, one of the things I help people with is having empowered conversation. So if you're a little hesitant to have a particular conversation, the what, how, where model can work too. What is it that I want to say? How do I want to deliver it? And where do I want to lead this conversation? Where do I intentionally want this to end up? What vision do I have for us hugging, everything going great, everybody being happy, having a win-win? That's the where part. So we can use this model anywhere. But in general, when it comes to ourselves and our value, it's what is my value? And at any one time, what are words, 5 of them, let's say? What are 5 core words that would describe key value traits that I have innate and that I've always had no matter what situation, what circumstance? And if I look back in my life, and for example, mine,
yes, I was going to ask you if you'll share your 5.
I will. Yeah, I'm happy to. Okay. So mine are loving, reverent, real, observant, and purposeful.
So do you enter every situation with those 5 words in the forefront? Can you repeat them again, please?
Loving, reverent, real, observant, and purposeful.
So before you came to this podcast, did you sit and look at those words or focus on those words?
Before anything. At this point, I think it's so knee-jerk that it's not, I'm not like, okay, I'm going to sit here. But in the beginning, it was, I'm going to sit quietly. I'm going to think about my words. I'm going to walk through them. But I found that by being intentional in each engagement, right? So this is what I have to give. So as you and I are engaged, and by proxy, I'm also engaging with the listenership, that I am focused on my core values of being loving. So being in this space of showing through my heart, having my heart open in this engagement, being reverent, that's honoring you, honoring how my words are going to land with others, honoring that everybody sees things and feels differently about things. So really being reverent in how I speak. Real. I don't BS. People who know me well know that. I'm very observant. I'm a person who just takes, again, I think it comes from the intuition piece. And purposeful. I don't do anything without purpose. I don't talk just to talk. Everything has its purpose with me. And I've always been like that. So it's about having that again, awareness that I have these, I'm going to call them superpowers. I have these skills. I have these value points that I can bring into every engagement. When I do it intentionally, then if something went sideways, if all of a sudden, for whatever reason, I said something that you took as irreverent,
right,
I can pivot more easily because I'm thinking in terms of reverence, like, oh, you're telling me it was irreverent. Well, I'm all about reverence. So how can we communicate around and get to the bottom of this, as opposed to just taking it as a slight? Or just even worse, what a lot of people do is just say, that's your problem.
In wrapping up, and we get close to the end here, what are some takeaways you want people to have for your book? I know that it's brand new. You've worked on it for quite a while. You told me it really flowed your writing. What compelled you to write it, and what are the takeaways you'd like people to have, especially in this world right now?
Yeah, so I'm the accidental author. I was approached by a man who I guess looks for what isn't yet available. And so he was specifically looking in the realm of leadership, and he had his finger on the pulse of what people are looking for in leadership books today. And he approached me because he had been reading my blogs on a regular basis. And he said, I think you talk about a lot of the things that people are saying they want, but they can't find in books. Okay. Would you be willing to write a book? Because we would like to support you to do that. And so I saw value in it, purpose. And so I went on that journey, and it's been wonderful. But I really found that it wrote itself, because in many ways it was really about diving into that, again, the observance part of who I am. What was I observing around me? What were the patterns in the culture and the changes that were going on? What did I see was, because visionaries, and which I am and work with visionaries, we see gaps and we're meant to fill them. Right, with solutions. And so when I look at patterns, I also am looking specifically through gaps. So through the lens of gap. And so it was, okay, what can I speak to that I see that other people might not, that can fill that gap, that can help them build more awareness and intention. And so really by just doing that and using a lot of my previous writings to lead the way, that's how the book came together.
So what do people want? What did he say people wanted right now?
So he said that we're really in a changing time. And this was back at the end of 2019 when so this was pre-quarantine.
Before the pandemic.
And he said that in leadership, the trends that were coming out and people, it almost, the way he described it, it was a combination of self-help and leadership. But self-help not in the kind of old school self-help way, but how do we really start to discover ourselves at a deeper level? And what impact does that have on leadership? Because we talk about what it is to be a good leader to others a lot. This is what we hear about, what you need to do for others.
So this seems like going back to the point of authentic leadership.
Yes, exactly. It was conscious leadership that he was really talking about. And although there were some books that were starting to come out, he says, I just see a thread through all of your work. I think it could be very beneficial. So that was what people were looking for, according to him.
So your book really does take people, leaders especially, through an inward journey. Questions to ask, how to empower themselves, how to stay in their own lane, how to follow that model.
Yes. Yes. And it was important to me, again, there's a lot of conceptual reads out there, right? Reads tend to fall into two categories. There's the conceptual that really makes us think about ideas, almost philosophical kind of experience. And then there's the practical. I wanted my book to be both. I wanted my book to take the concepts that we talk about. What is authenticity? It's a concept. And how do we make it practical? How do we bring it into the day-to-day? What methods of exercise or models can we use to actually utilize that concept and make it real for ourselves?
I love that you had those reflective exercises in the book.
Thank you.
So one of the quotes I also love in closing today, Traci, definitely relates to worthiness. When leaders claiming their own value, and others as well, our life is not simply a tool to be used for the benefit of others. We are also meant to receive value for who we are and what we were born to build, create, and manifest. That's a very powerful quote on worthiness.
Yeah, it does speak.
And a lot of people know how to give, and it's learning to receive and take in that really completes the circle and adds to their own fulfillment in their service to others as leaders.
It does. And it goes back to the original question you asked about and the title of this conversation, which is wading into leadership. We can't receive if we're not in that reception state. And really wading is being in that place of curiosity and openness. We learn the most when we're little. And that's when we're also most curious. So there's that correlation between curiosity and high levels of learning.
It's almost giving leaders permission to spend more time being curious.
Yes, because as we're curious, we are naturally in a more receptive state. We're the student more often than the teacher. And,
And also, I would think a more creative state.
It really does. And they say the state of gratitude is one of the highest vibrational states. The curiosity is one of the most open, right, to receiving. And so if we are challenged to receive, I say to people, let's work on curiosity. Let's work on your response to something that you don't like instead of being pushback kind of thing. How can we open up to curiosity? Okay, even curious state of why am I giving push? Start with inner curiosity of, whoa, I just had a very strong reaction to that question. What is that about? Let me be curious with myself.
Traci, it's been a delight to have you on today. And again, Traci's new book is called Looking In. Discover, define, and align the true value of your life, leadership, and legacy. And it can be ordered through Amazon. Thank you for joining me on our journey today. I am so grateful you are part of my podcast community, where it is my dream that by claiming our worthiness together, we can more impactfully shed our light and love on this world. In future podcasts, I'll be sharing more stories of hope and unlimited possibilities for creating anew. You can also follow me on Instagram or on my Facebook page. I also hope you'll be inspired to share my podcast with your friends. Together, we are stronger. Blessings, Gail.
Instagram and Facebook at Coach Gail Jones.